Hello again. I'm Angela Taylor, your host for Unlocking the Club. And today, this is a really special episode for reasons that you'll shortly find out. But today, I want to unlock navigating grief and loss. Many of you may know, and some of you don't, but I talk so often on this podcast about my mother and the special relationship I had with my mother. And it's been a year. It literally has been almost a year to the day since my mother passed away on November 15th of 2021. And to be honest, I'm praying that I can get through this conversation in a way that brings value to each of you and all of our listeners. Many that know me know that I'm incredibly private, but grief is a topic that we must unlock, particularly for Black women and women in general. I think it's a topic that we don't talk about enough. It's messy. We're not quite sure how to navigate it, whether we're going through grief ourselves or if one of our loved ones is grieving a loss. We don't quite know what to say or to do in those moments. And so this is a really important topic, and I wanted to take the time to have this conversation today and to hopefully unlock how to navigate grief and loss in your own way. And so since launching this podcast, grief has been a topic that I actually wanted to prioritize. Talk to a lot of friends and potential guests on the show about grief in their lives. It just came up in casual conversation. And it shows up so subtly in many of the conversations that I've already shared with you here on Unlocking the Club as well. So I think it's top of mind for so many of us. We all will go through it at some stage in our journey, whether it's a parent or unfortunately maybe a child or a friend or extended family member. And it's certainly something that has been present for me on a daily basis. I've lost people, friends, and acquaintances in the past, but the depth of my grief, I certainly didn't know until I lost my mother. And what I do recognize is that you're never ready, right? And you're certainly never ready to lose the person that knows you the best, the person that loves you unconditionally. And so this grief, this sense of grief and loss is something that's present for me on a daily basis. And so I just want to kind of share some stories before we invite our guests in today to have this important conversation and to unlock some things that I hope you all can take hold of. I just want to share some of what my journey the last year has been. So after I lost my mom last November, I actually had a little God wink when the first date of our guest who was available for today's episode happened. Right. So we've been trying to schedule this show, and it worked out that it was going to be on this date that, again, was right around the time of my mother's death. And so God winks are something that have become really present in my life. And they were pointed out by one of my previous show guests, Renee Brown, who has been a mentor and a friend and a sister to me for decades. But shortly thereafter, my mother passed away last year. Renee came to visit me, and she was helping me walk through all the different things that you need to do to prepare for the celebration of life. And as she was helping me put the checklist together and figure things out, I shared this box of memories that I have of my mother, just little cards or the notes and letters she would put in all the care packages she would send to me until I was 30 something years old. And at the bottom of that box, I hadn't really opened that box except for just throwing the cards in on a regular basis. And I hadn't gone through them in years. But Renee kind of started to go through the notes and the letters, and she came to the bottom of the box, and there was a card that was sealed, and it had my handwriting on it, and it was addressed to my mother. And what I recognized was, as Renee handed it to me, it was like, you need to open this because this is a God wink. And I recognized it was a Mother's Day card that I never sent. It was a Mother's Day card from a time where I actually was moving from the Bay Area after finishing my job at Stanford University and was heading out to New York City, where I would be for 10 years. And It was in May that I was in transit, and I never got a chance to either come visit my mom on Mother's Day as I had intended, and or put that card in the mail. And so I opened the card and read the message. And it's a message that I actually read at her celebration of life ceremony as I was given a eulogy. And the key theme of that card said something to the extent of, everything a daughter does, the mother did. And it went on to talk about all these things that I loved about my mom. And it had a special note that I had written as well. And I know all of the things that I have accomplished on my journey or wanted to do or aspired to do, they were things that my mother loved as well. And so that was one of the first God winks that I had. This interview has been on the calendar for over a month, and I have to admit that I've been equally excited about the upcoming discussion and worried that I won't get through the conversation with the poise and polish that I pride myself on. But I am incredibly grateful to be able to talk to the author of this amazing book that has helped me reconcile all of the unfamiliar thoughts and feelings that I was having about 5 months into losing my mother. And so when Marisa Renee Lee's book, Grief is Love, Living with Loss came out, I believe it was last April, or this past April, it actually allowed me to forgive myself for the angst that I was experiencing as I was dealing with a painful loss. I just didn't understand all of the different feelings that were going on. But I was able to understand that it was so torturous because of how much love I actually shared with my mother as a result of reading Marisa's book. But up until reading her book, my days were like Groundhog Days. I would wake up after really not getting a lot of sleep or any sleep at all. I would work out. That was my routine and the thing that I needed to be able to start my day. And then I would just get ready for the day and spend as many hours at work as possible. Maybe from time to time stopping to grab some food or some healthy foods, certainly a lot of candy bars. And then I would delay logging off my computer as the sun went down and the night got quiet, because I didn't want to show up in that silence, those moments that actually, since my mother lived with me, that when I would leave the office, my home office, she would be right outside the door in the living room watching one of her Westerns. And so I kept delaying those moments. And when I finally would leave my office, I would eat dinner, quickly go to my room, get on my laptop computer, and basically eat a pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Like, I literally didn't notice that I had purchased about 8 pints of ice cream on my way home from a friend's house one night until I couldn't find room in one of our 4 freezers when I got home. And maybe about 2 months later, I put myself on a scale and had gained weight that I hadn't even recognized. But then I would think about, on each day, I would try to go to sleep, but I needed to binge something else. So I would turn the TV back on and binge some Netflix show or some bad TV. And then it was rinse and repeat. And sometimes I felt like the more I cried, that maybe God would actually change his mind and send her back to us. And then at other times, the tears flowed because the loss began to feel more real as the numbness wore off. And it was in the ordinary moments, eating a banana or walking in from the garage, driving past the Dairy Queen, where we would always stop in and get her ice cream cone, or walking past her favorite chair in the living room where I would walk behind her and just like playfully tickle her or play with her hair. Those were the things that I missed the most, those ordinary moments. And then I had a sense of guilt for not getting her to the doctor sooner, or having the doctor stay in her room in that moment where her last breath was slipping away. I was irrational at times, but I think I'm okay with it. I would lose my mind quietly and in private when I walked into the living room and would see someone sitting in my mom's favorite chair. And I lost my bearings. And what I realized is that so much of my motivation to be successful, to do good, to achieve, was because I wanted to make my parents, but especially my mother, proud. I was actually sitting in a meeting with my consulting company and our colleagues, and we were just talking about what we were hopeful for the new year. I waited to go till the end because I didn't know. And I had to share with them that I actually didn't know what I was hoping for. Is for me, someone who had been so driven and goal-oriented, I recognized in that moment that many of my goals and my aspirations were fueled by my desire to make my parents, and again, especially my mom, proud of everything that I did. And so for the first few months, I was simply going through the motions because I wasn't sure what it was or what my motivation would be from there forward. And then I read Marisa Renee Lee's book, Grief is Love. And one paragraph in particular helped me understand what was at the core of my pain. And that paragraph, as I opened her book, that paragraph was in chapter 10, titled Love. And it read, "Love doesn't die. Love endures forever. Your mother, your father, your brother, your wife, your best friend, whoever you lost still loves you. And their inability to act on that love is why we grieve. Those of us left behind are asked to manage the pain of unrequited, unconditional love, love that is never returned in the way we want it to be by the people we've lost. This is the source of our pain. The greater the love, the greater the pain." And in that moment, as I was reading the book, and it was so cathartic reading the book, there were so many things that she shared that just took me down the road, and I connected with every word and sentence and paragraph that she wrote. But that grief is love. The reason why I was going through so much pain was because I had so much love, and I had received so much love from this amazing woman that I had the pleasure and the honor of calling my mom. And after I read that book, I was actually able to receive so many of the positive messages that others had shared with me. A good friend of mine, Chad, had called me a couple days after my mom's passing, and he encouraged me. And he said, "Angela, it's in these moments. Listen to the stories that your mom's friends and family members and others share about her, because you'll learn so much more about your mother as you listen to these stories that you weren't necessarily involved in." And it is so true. Like, I appreciate so much more about my mom because I've seen her through the prism of others and their stories and their journey with my mother. Now, don't get me wrong. Along with all of these things that I've shared, the painful moments, I'm still enjoying the moments and the new memories with my brothers, my father, my friends, our team members, with all the different companies that I'm working with. And I'm even starting to put together this little spreadsheet trying to capture those ordinary moments where a thought of my mom actually makes me smile, and sometimes shed a tear, such as making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or watching our beloved Cowboys, or sitting on the patio just listening to the birds chirp, or just walking into a room where her things are. And what I'm reminded of is the title of this book, Grief is Love. And I know that this conversation may be a difficult conversation for me and for many of us. And so I actually invited a member of my team of allies to join me. And so today I'm grateful to one of our former podcast guests, Beverly Oden, who is an Olympian, a counselor, and an entrepreneur, for saying yes to my either silent or loud plea to join me on this show. So I want to invite Beverly in here for a moment before we bring in Marisa for our conversation as we try to unpack and unlock Black women in grief.
Welcome to the Unlocking the Club podcast, where we host honest and direct conversations about journeys of access, personal truth, and reclaiming space. We share our truth so that you can find the key to own your truth, honor your journey, and reclaim your space. Grab your keys, your wallet, your phone, and invite your friends to meet you at the club. Here's your host, Angela Taylor.
Bev, how are you doing?
I am good. Good to see you. And that was beautiful what you said there just now. Touched my heart.
Thank you. Well, you being here touches my heart. And again, as many of you experienced a month or so ago on one of our first episodes of Unlocking the Club, Beverly is doing so many amazing things, is an amazing human being. And as we were talking earlier this week, in a normal conversation about something, I think I'd called you to ask a favor about something else that wasn't painful or sad. And somehow we start talking about our mothers, and it wasn't pretty, right? For me, like, right, there were a lot of tears that ensued, and I just appreciate how you created this space to allow me to be able to share stories, talk about what I was going through in that particular moment, how I was feeling, and then you also knowing that maybe like you showing up today would be needed. So thanks for being here.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Always happy to talk with you and to hear kind of what you're going through because, I was a witness to the relationship you had with your mom. And I saw how special that was. And I think when you see something like that, as soon as I heard that she was not feeling well, and I was just like, the depth of the loss of a person like that is just so huge and so profound and so life-changing that, it was, I told you this yesterday when we were talking, but it was like to see the relationships that you had, that people came out, across the country and the world really to be with you in that moment. And I felt grateful to be one of them that was able to experience, her homegoing and all of the meals and talks around that. But yeah, it's been a pleasure for me to be here for you in as much as I can. It's a grief is one of, I think, the most difficult things because it's so hard to put words around because the feelings are so deep, and some of it doesn't make sense. And so I feel like, just allowing people to talk about it is part of the grieving process, but it's part of the things that we weren't really trained to do. And so I struggle with how to express grief. And so I'm glad to be here to learn from your guest and from you on how that went.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a learning journey that you go through. And right, I know you just lost your father, right? A short period of time ago. And I think it's one of those things, like, I knew I wasn't there for you in the way that you were able to be there for me. Because sometimes until you've gone through a loss such as this, particularly a loss of a parent, you actually don't understand the depth of the pain that somebody is going through. And so again, I've learned through how you show up, and again, to your point, so many people in my life who showed up when I needed them the most and continue to show up for me and allow me to have this space. So again, thanks for being here to talk about grief a little bit. And we're actually going to start to get ready to invite in our guest. Our special guest on today's episode of Unlocking the Club is Marisa Renee Lee. And I would love to talk a little bit about her bio. So today on Unlocking the Club, I'll be joined by Marisa Renee Lee. Marisa is a called upon advocate, writer, and speaker on coping with grief. In 2008, she lost her mother to breast cancer. And in 2019, Marisa and her husband lost a much wanted pregnancy. And most recently, she lost a young cousin to the COVID-19 pandemic. These losses transformed her life and led her to question what grief really is and what healing truly requires. As a leading grief advocate, Marisa offers incisive and compassionate advice on managing life after loss with unique insights for women in African American communities. She recently partnered with Ritual's Wellbeing app as a writer and narrator alongside other leaders in science, faith, and culture. Her first book, Grief is Love, Living with Loss, was published in April 2022 under Hachette's new imprint Legacy Lit and is already a national bestseller. As a former appointee in the Obama White House, Marisa previously served as the Deputy Director of Private Sector Engagement, a senior advisor on the Domestic Policy Council, and as the Managing Director of the MBK Alliance, the nonprofit born out of President Obama's call to action to address the barriers to success that boys and young men of color disproportionately face in their lives. She is a rabble-rouser of social healing and currently serves as CEO of the social impact consulting firm Beacon Advisors, co-founder of the digital platform Supportal, and founder of the Pink Agenda, a national organization dedicated to raising money for breast cancer care, research, and awareness. Marisa is also a public speaker and regular contributor to Glamour, Vogue, MSNBC, and The Atlantic. She's a graduate of Harvard College and lives in the DC area with her husband, Matt, son, Bennett, and dog, Sadie. Thanks for tuning in as we unlock the club with Marisa Renee Lee. Marisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a great conversation. It was nice even just listening in, hearing some of your reflections and thoughts about your mom, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I know before the show, we just talked about all the things that are going on in all of our lives. And I really am grateful to you for having the courage to put on paper and to share with the world what you were going through as you were navigating loss of your mother, of a child, of a dear family member as well. And I think in your beautifully written book, Marisa, there was a statement that you made, like, we can no longer afford to ignore grief, to relegate it to whispered conversations, to expect folks to navigate the brokenheartedness on their own. It is neither practical nor possible nor human. So I would love to hear about the inspiration for that statement and for you actually having the courage to write your journey down and print for us all to read.
Yeah, so I'll answer the first part of the question, and then I'll give you kind of some background on what motivated me to write Grief is Love. I wrote the introduction to the book last, and I ended up turning in this book very late because, as I think you know, Angela, my husband and I adopted a newborn son a couple weeks before I finished the book. So I had him kind of in the background. So that piece that you just read was literally only written probably about a year ago. And at the time, I felt like so many people were trying to get to this place of, the pandemic just being over. We all wanted it to be over and done with, but at the same time, there was so much both collective grief and community grief, and also a lot of individual grief that people experienced from losing loved ones or losing a job or losing their way of life in some other form due to the pandemic. And so I felt like, now is the time when we have to be talking about this. Like, I don't think you can ignore grief when you live in a country where in a 2-year period, over 1 million people passed away from a single thing. I don't know how you pretend like grief isn't something that needs to be addressed. So that was my motivation for that particular piece. And I continue to feel that deeply. What motivated me to write the book? I lost my mom in February of 2008. So almost 15 years ago now, which is kind of crazy. And a couple months after she died, after months of the disorienting, overwhelming pain of grief and my own self-judgment, feeling like I wasn't doing it right and I needed to get over it and all of these expectations around moving on, I turned a corner and I said, you know what? Like, there isn't anything wrong with me for having all of these feelings about my mom who died. Like, she was my mom. She was one of my best friends and also someone who I spent a lot of time taking care of as a young adult. Like, I'm allowed to be sad and to continue to miss her and to have these feelings forever. Like, I think there's nothing wrong with me, but where the problem sits is in how we as a culture talk about and treat grief and loss and people who are grieving. You watch a movie or a TV show, someone passes away, everybody gets dressed in black, goes to the funeral. A week or two later, it's all good. Like, that is just not real. And so I wrote to myself in my journal in August of 2008 that I was going to write a book about grief that told the truth about what grief really is. And I said the book wouldn't be sad and depressing, and it would be a bestseller. So that was what I decided at 25 years old, and it took over a decade to actually get the book written. But that, I knew that it was inside of me and that there had to be a better way to do this thing.
We'll talk about manifesting what you want. It wasn't sad, right? It was inspiring and uplifting in so many different ways. and it certainly is a bestseller. So here's to out there in the world what you want to accomplish. But you talked a little bit now, and certainly in the book, about as a culture how we do navigate through grief. And Bev and I have talked about this quite a bit. As Black women, where you're the caretaker, and particularly if you're successful, like, right, you always want to let everyone think, right, that you're put together, you have everything together. And I know at the funeral how I showed up and how I didn't want to show up, as if I was, like, right, gonna lose it. And I've heard so often, like, what is it that we need to convey to Black women to have the grace and give ourselves permission to grieve?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Black women, we need to redefine what it means to be strong. Like, strength can't be about swallowing every feeling and emotion and just continuing to soldier on. We need to redefine strength as making intentional decisions to care for ourselves, to give ourselves permission to grieve or to have a hard time or to, need to go to therapy or anything else as a part of strength. Like, we have to find a way in our community to let go of this, frankly, toxic narrative, because fundamentally feelings that we have that we don't express, that we try to swallow and ignore, they don't go away. They just manifest in different forms. And usually for us, unfortunately, they manifest in negative health outcomes. They manifest in things like weight gain and high blood pressure. In my case, it was insomnia and like a crazy weight loss. Like I couldn't eat after my mom passed away. I weighed 25 pounds less than I do right now. And like, I think about that and I like can't even wrap my mind around it today, but that's because I refuse to do that at this point. Like, I know that the only thing that makes these challenging emotions easier is when we acknowledge them. And that's not just my personal opinion. Like, that is what the leading research and every therapist I've seen over the last 10 years tells us.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand what you guys are both saying about the eating part, the emotional eating part, and how food has really been such a, a comfort in these times, but it can totally take it on a life of its own and create a whole nother problem. But it's something that we can do to make ourselves feel better in the short term, And so I relied on food quite a lot during those times as well. So, there's a place for it, especially I think when people are not there for us in the way that we need. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about people's reactions to prolonged grief, or as they're calling it, complicated grief, right? Like the kind that lasts a while and the friends in your life are like, hey, okay, it's enough. You need to get back to stuff, start working, they just want you to move so quickly out of it. And I just wondered if you had anything to say about how people support you, and when you're not getting what you need, what can you do about that?
Yeah, so this is a question that comes up in literally every conversation about this book. I think overall I was very fortunate on the grief support front. I was young. My friends were young. Like, this was the first time something like this had happened to any of us. And they did their best to find ways to support me. It definitely wasn't perfect. And, we all know a lot more now than we did 15 years ago when we were in our early 20s. But I will say I want to say a piece on the complicated grief. Like, I want to tell people, if you are grieving, you recently lost someone you love and you're falling apart, for lack of a better term. You're having a hard time just getting out of bed and getting your teeth brushed and getting dressed. Forget about going to work. Like, that is normal. And the definition of complicated grief isn't that you continue to grieve, because frankly, like, I've been grieving on and off for 15 years and like, I still have a full, happy life and, a big career and a family that's functioning, et cetera, et cetera. But it's more for when people stay in that like sort of early, very heavy, very dark stage where they aren't able to function. And I don't want people to confuse that with continuing to think about, to miss, to, sometimes cry about a loss that happened long ago. Like that is normal. And I want to make sure we normalize that experience for people. But complicated grief is more about ensuring that folks who get stuck on their healing journey are able to access the therapeutic resources and counseling that they need to get to a place of living with loss, as opposed to sort of being stuck in loss. I think if you are dealing with grief and you feel like you're not getting the support you need from your community and the people you love, you gotta get really clear with them and ask for what you need and extend a little bit of grace to them. Because, one thing that we all know from having experienced grief ourselves is sometimes when you're grieving, like you don't even know what you need. And so for someone else to come in and try to support you, like it's not an easy thing to do. And it's not an easy thing to get right. And so I think if you're feeling like I really need XYZ from my partner, from my friends, from my coworkers, whatever, I want people to feel empowered to ask for it and not feel ashamed of asking for help. And then frankly, if you still don't get what you need from people you care about and people who care about you, that's when boundaries come into play. Not everyone can handle grief. And you may have people in your life who are, for any myriad of reasons, are just not able to properly support you. And it's not healthy for you to put yourself, or for you to keep yourself in a position where you're constantly asking and not getting what you need. So I think it's comfort around asking for help, and then comfort around establishing clear boundaries when people just continue to disappoint you.
One of the things, Marisa, that I appreciate about what you wrote in the book was unlocking like therapy, right? In the Black community, right? It's one of those things we never talk about. Like Bev and I, and friends, we talk all the time. Like if you broke a bone, they're gonna like get to the hospital, right? Like you need to get medical attention. If it's something, one of these soft things that people can't quite have a tangible understanding of, they're like, go to the Lord in prayer, like you'll be all right, and all those things. But I appreciate how you talked about how you navigate the role. Like, some therapists that were great, some that weren't, but you were trying to find the therapist that can help you in those moments. And I think whether it's a friend or family members or somebody that you can talk to and really just be in your authentic pain, so important to do. What is it in the Black community in particular that we need to unpack and unlock to allow ourselves to be okay with getting the counseling that is necessary?
So I think it's a couple things. I think there are a lot of misconceptions sort of generally about therapy. Like I often hear people say stuff like, trying to find a therapist is like trying to find a spouse. And I don't actually think that's true. And I'm going to give you a sort of admittedly inappropriate reframe on therapy that was like a little bit too cheeky for this book, but this is honestly how I feel about it. Finding a therapist is not finding a spouse. Finding a therapist is about finding someone who like maybe you go on a couple of dates with, and you want to find someone who you can have a good one night stand with. Like you need to be clear about your expectations. You need to be clear about your boundaries. And if you're clear about those two things, you usually will get what you wanted out of it, And so like, I think if people can take a lighter approach, that helps.
Well, I think that it's really important to have that conversation. And I love kind of the, just the dating around analogy. Because again, I'm someone who takes a lot of pride in my capability and capacity to be able to give myself the things I need, to give myself the grace and all those things. And I recognize that, I don't drink, right? But if I was someone who drank alcohol or who did other substances, like I would have completely abused that in that moment. And it was Ben and Jerry's. It was Ben and Jerry's for me. But I also had these moments where I was like, okay, it's been 27 days. How am I supposed to get through the next 27 years without my mother? Like I can't do it. I can't go on. Like, and I had to pull myself out of like, if I were someone who was in a different mental state, I may do something, right, that I would never have imagined myself doing.
That's 100%. And that is like the debilitating pain of grief. It can, and oftentimes for a lot of people, it does lead to some degree of substance abuse. And also, you know, in my case, I mentioned in the book, like I definitely had a moment where I was like, oh, you know, I understand now how someone can get to a point where ending your life seems like a reasonable path forward, which is, you know, horrible and not something I ever thought I would understand or experience, but like the pain is that bad and it is that heavy that I'm not surprised at all to hear you say that. I think that's very normal.
Yeah, and I had to reconcile that, like, right, like I, as someone, right, never thought and couldn't connect with those folks that you had heard had considered it, right, in their life. And in a moment, on multiple basis, that moment, whether it was fleeting or not, would pop into the mind. And so, again, this is why your book was so powerful, and just being able to understand that the pain was really an indication of the love and the joy and the moments in the place.
Yeah, and I just to follow up on that, I want to ask you about grief. I think what you were saying, Angela, before about like grief being love, right? And that love and grief sort of go together. There's whether you lose the person, yeah, whether you lose the person you're dating or whatever, there's grief there. There's grief and loss from a job, you mentioned, things like that. Um, I had a lot of loss early in my life. So there was, I had several friends in elementary school and junior high that passed away through accidents and things like that, right? And so I was very young, and back then we didn't have grief counselors, so there was nobody to come and say like, "Hey, you might be feeling this, you might be feeling that." Like we had no idea what was going on, and they just like, yeah, it was terrible. And and looking back on it now, I'm just like, that was ridiculous. We just went back to class, and it was like, okay, well, there's an empty desk there, so you know, that person's gone. And I feel like part of it is just education on what might you be feeling so that you can start to recognize in yourself like this, oh, okay, I see what that might be, right? But I wonder too, because I now that I've done some counseling and done some work on myself, I realize how much those early losses impacted my ability to be in relationship and trust that the person was not going to leave or die or, you know. And so I wondered if you could speak a little bit on loving again after you know the pain of that loss. It's like, why would I do that to myself again?
That is an entire chapter in Grief is Love. Like, it is an excellent question. For me, it was, you know, I met a guy, I think I met him about 3 years or so after my mom passed away. And at that point, you know, I felt like I had worked through my grief. You know, like, of course I still missed her, but I was like, you know, I think I've got this thing. I've got it under control. Like, I was working in the Obama administration, like in the White House, like doing great, bought my own home. You know, I was like, I'm good. And then I started dating this guy, and it was really hard. Like, especially when we only a few months in decided to move in together. And this was the first, and it turns out the last guy I was ever going to live with. And it was so much anxiety, like even just talking to you all about it now. And at this point, we've been together for 11 years, and that 14-month-old belongs to both of us. But it was so anxiety inducing. And initially I was like, you know, what is going on here? Like, did I make a mistake? Like, does he need to move out? Like, maybe that's what this is. And then, you know, talk to a couple girlfriends and like realize like, oh no, like this actually isn't about him at all. Like, this is 100% me. It's so much easier to just casually date here in DC than it is to get into an intentional, serious relationship with someone who could become a life partner, when I actually know, I've seen in real life, like what till death do us part actually looks like. And it sucks. Like, oh my God. And I had to go to therapy. And it only, in that instance, it was, you know, 3 or 4 sessions of just talking through like, oh, this is why I feel this way, and this is what I can do about it, and this is how I should approach it with him so that he understands what's going on here and doesn't think that I suddenly don't like him anymore, whatever. But it takes work, because there's a lot of underlying fear and trauma that is often associated with loss, especially if the loss occurs at like certain formative ages, or if it is, one of these people that are really our people, our parents, our children, our best friends, etc. So it's real. And, I would just say for folks who are like, yeah, I would rather avoid the pain of another loss. Like for me, I ended up feeling like, you know what, like I'm still here. And as long as I'm here, like I want to do whatever I need to do to live the biggest, best, most joyful life possible. Not just for myself, but also for my mom. I thought about everything that she poured into me the 25 years we had together. And I knew she would like this guy. And so I was like, okay, I got to figure this out.
Well, I think on the other side of that coin is exactly what you just pointed to is, and Bev and I talk about this all the time. Like I think about finding my match, if you will, like, right. And sometimes I have to stop even contemplating the possibility of these big lifetime monumental things, because I would want my mom to be part of that aspect of my life. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how you would advise people to create space for new life experiences like love or children, when perhaps the person that you would want to be part of it the most is no longer with you in the flesh.
So I think it's twofold. One is leaving space for you to have moments of sadness and reflection. Like I became a mom last year, and it's something that my husband and I had worked toward for 5 years. And so like when it actually happened, of course we were overjoyed. But then, literally within a couple of days, it hit us, the whole not having her with us to share in this experience in the way that we would have wanted her to. We were 48 hours in and both had been up for every feeding and diaper change and, everything. And we were just bleary-eyed and exhausted and both in tears, like wishing that my mom was around to help us out, because we were like just lost, exhausted parents. And then the other thing that I will say is, while it's important to hold space for feelings of sadness and like lack and to acknowledge their absence, I also think it's really important to find ways to bring them along for the ride. My son, his favorite food is pancakes. Every Sunday before church, pretty much no matter how sick she was, like my mom would make us pancakes. So when we kicked off the book tour for Grief is Love, like the first day, it was like, okay, we're going to give Bennett his first pancakes. Or with Christmas, it was so funny. Last Christmas was the baby's first Christmas, and everybody in my life, whether it's work life or family, friends, knows that Christmas was my mom's thing. Like she was really good at Christmas, and it was over the top and ridiculous. So of course, like a dozen people sent Bennett personalized Christmas ornaments last year. It covers like a whole portion of the tree. And so I think it's both like creating space to include them in meaningful ways that are authentic and joyful for you, and also holding space for the moments when you're just like, this sucks, because sometimes it just kind of sucks. And that's the truth of it. Grief is love. I want people to know that both the joyful moments and the times when you think about your mom or sibling or best friend and you smile and you're like, oh, like they would have loved this, or, you wish they were there. But there are also times, my first Mother's Day was really hard, for instance, like the kind of balancing the joy of being a new mom and also the grief of her not being a part of my motherhood journey and me not being able to celebrate her. And, I had to save some time for some tears, and that's okay too.
Yeah. And I think that in the book, you talk about the and-ness of things, right?
Yeah.
Like that both can be true, and allowing yourself, right, in the same moment to be joyful or happy, and also to be grieving the loss of that person. And I think in addition to the pancakes, I need to get this recipe for roast chicken, that apparently.
Oh, I have a bunch of different roast chicken hacks. I've got you.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to get that offline here after the show for sure. Well, last question I have for you, Marisa, as we talk about grief, is what do we need to unlock grief and loss, particularly in the Black community and specifically for Black women, so that we can navigate it in a way that we're in wellness?
I think we need to continue to have these types of conversations. We really need to be talking about it and be more open about it. And then the other thing that I am really focused on is ensuring that we have spaces to heal. Unfortunately, the communities that tend to be the most impacted by grief and loss and death also oftentimes end up being the communities that are also the most disconnected from the resources that can facilitate healing, practically, like physical health supports, mental health resources, paid time off, et cetera. And so I am all about both shifting the narrative around grief and loss and ultimately shifting policy around grief and loss and grief support, because right now the world isn't set up in a way where everyone has the same opportunity to heal.
So true. Well, and I think that you have shifted the narrative through your book. Again, like I was in a completely different space before, somehow hearing about your book. I don't know if it was on social media and I ordered it immediately. And as soon as I started to read it, I started to experience that loss differently. So grateful to you for writing this book. It truly has been a gift. And I want to thank you for your candor and honesty in the book and in our conversation today. And I also want to thank my good friend Beverly for being here and helping me get through this today. Again, you continue to be a blessing.
Anytime. So great to meet you, Marisa. And I'm going to get the book and read it myself as well. I think it's a wonderful addition, and especially to have it coming from an African-American author is just amazing.
Thank you so much.
Well, we are here on Unlocking the Club with Marisa Renee Lee and Beverly Oden. I'm your host, Angela Taylor. When we come back for the second part of our conversation, I'm actually going to pivot a little bit to find out more about Marisa's amazing story and her journey as we continue to unlock the club. We'll be right back with Marisa Renee. Do you want to stop feeling like you have little to no control over your life's journey and instead amplify your life's purpose? You all know me as Angela Taylor, host of the Unlocking the Club podcast, but I am also a business, career, life, and leadership coach, helping my clients to live their best life. Every day, I help my clients discover what they truly want in life, and then unlock the club on how they can live their best life. If you're like many of my clients, you have found yourself over the years prioritizing everyone else and everything else. Your job, your significant other, your family, your friends, your community, the list goes on and on. Well, I'm here to tell you the best thing you can do for others is to invest in yourself. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to succumb to the fear of failure. You don't have to be perfect. You don't need to feel like you're being selfish. You simply need to prioritize you. You may be thinking that coaching is for other people, but trust me when I say that we all could benefit from a good coaching relationship. Together, we'll build a plan to help you amplify your gifts, clarify your goals, and accelerate your journey toward the life you desire, which may be finding financial wealth, spiritual health, relationship success, and/or freedom and flexibility. You no longer have to feel like you aren't welcome into someone else's club. Let me empower you to leverage all of your extraordinary gifts and create your own club. Head on over to unlockingtheclub.com to book a free 20-minute introductory call to learn more about our Unlocking Your Journey coaching packages, or use code UNLOCK to get a 15% discount on the 6-month coaching package. Today is the day to invest in yourself. Let's unlock your journey. Welcome back to Unlocking the Club. I'm your host, Angela Taylor, and I'm excited to actually find out a little bit more about today's special guest, Marisa Renee Lee. So I'm going to welcome Marisa back in for this conversation. And again, thank you so much for the perspective and the insight that you shared with us as we talked about grief and your book, Grief is Love. If you have not already purchased Grief is Love, go to Amazon, go to Marisa's website, which is scrolling here at the bottom of the screen. It'll be in our show notes as well. A fantastic book, a great gift to give. And you'll find the words that you need to share with other people who are going through grief. I've shared this book with so many people, men and women who are going through grief, and mentioned that term, grief is love, at funerals when I know folks are trying to navigate this new horizon that they're on. So Marisa, first and foremost, we've talked about your book and we've talked about your journey through grief. I'm curious, can you share with our listeners a little bit more about who you are and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So in addition to my grief work, which is, the book, I write articles for a few publications and do interviews like these with wonderful folks. But this is, for now, at least, a bit more of my side project. My day job is I run a small strategy and impact consulting firm called Beacon Advisors, and I work primarily on racial equity issues for nonprofits and philanthropists, and in some cases, businesses as well.
Amazing. Well, so you, a mother, right, a wife,
oh yes, that too.
Sister, right, all of the things, and doing some great things. I know that you also
Yes.
started a foundation raising money for breast health and awareness. Like, who do you have to be to show up so powerfully in all of the spaces that you are navigating?
I think what I am learning as I get older is, in order for me to show up fully, like, two things have to happen. One, I have to do whatever I need to do to take care of my physical and mental and emotional health. I'm feeling that even more now that I'm a parent, thinking a lot about what do I want to model for my child, and, what does self-care really look like for me? And then the second thing that has always been true for me is I have to really feel deeply my work. Otherwise it doesn't work. And so I've been very fortunate and privileged to work on issues that I really care about for organizations that I think are doing really great work in the world. So the majority of my clients are focused on some element of racial equity or access to opportunity for underserved communities. And that's really important to me.
I want to unpack both of those things, self-care and this thing about doing the work that you're really passionate about and that you care about. I know that you were on Wall Street early on in your journey, right around the time that you lost your mother as well. And I think sometimes as Black women who are gifted, right, and are talented and are put in a position where they can take care of themselves and others in their family, right, particularly from a financial standpoint, we make different choices.
100%.
Has that shown up for you, and how did you bridge that gap of going from okay, maybe I want to be on Wall Street in this?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. For me, so I spent 4 years at Harvard. My mom had multiple sclerosis from the time I was 13 until she died. So she was sick when I was in college. And then the week that I was graduating, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, which we knew would be a death sentence. And so for me, staying close to my parents became number one priority. Essentially, how do I balance this family commitment that is really important to me with, not wanting to completely let go of my career and my professional dreams. And so I had majored in government in college. And by the time I graduated, I felt like in order for me to have the kind of positive impact that I hoped to have on the world as a 22-year-old, I needed to understand how money works. I wanted to understand investments and finance and how wealthy people make decisions about things, and just sort of more about how the economy works overall and how money flows, so that I could use that information to ultimately influence public policy and help the people who need it most. And so the Wall Street move, while it wasn't what I was expecting to do after graduating from Harvard, it very much made sense to me in terms of the bigger picture and wanting to have a very real and meaningful impact on the world. And I ended up being really lucky. You know, a lot of Wall Street is like, you know, like the Wolf of Wall Street movie, and kind of like dog eat dog and intense and competitive. And I definitely got some of that in my workplace, but the company that I worked for after graduating was really good to me. Like, I was deeply invested in. I got a lot of free education, like basically a mini MBA before I even started the job that they fully finance and pay for. And then when my mom reached a point where we were no longer doing treatment for her cancer and her MS, I remember I like had a little bit of a breakdown. You know, it was like, how am I going to manage my job and be there for my mom and my dad? And I went into work one day and I said, I can't do this anymore. You know, like, my mom is dying. I don't know how much time she has. She's no longer doing treatment. And so I'm going to have to resign because I can't be here 5 days a week. Like, I just can't do it. And they said, no. They said, we'll work with you and we'll make this work and we'll do whatever you need if you want to keep working. And of course, I mean, I practically needed to keep working. I didn't really have a plan after the resignation. And so I ended up just splitting my time between my parents' house and the banking platform. And then when my mom died, they shut down the entire department. Everybody came to her services. Like, I don't think I could have been more supported. You know, it was sort of the opposite of a traditional finance experience. So yeah, I've been really, really lucky that when I've had to kind of figure out that balance between family commitments, financial and otherwise, and, you know, professional obligations and ambition, I've been able to find a way to honor both.
Yeah, what strikes me about that story is a few things. Because you were able to build that social capital that was necessary, that I think so often for many of us who are taught, put your head down, work as hard as you can, get good grades, go to a good school, get a good job, and just work hard. You had social capital and you built relationships through vulnerability, and the alignment between the messages that you just conveyed in your career and what was palpable in you navigating what was going on in work was really important. But the other thing that was present, Marisa, in what you shared was that there's so much overlap between the things that you encourage us to do when we're dealing with grief. Give ourselves permission, right? Ask for what you need and navigate the space in the world with intention is actually some of the same things that showed up for you in your career to get you to where you are today, it sounds like.
100%. I just feel like with life, if you are consistent with regard to your values and your intentions, it makes it easier to navigate the world, you know? And it's funny, in the time before we adopted our son, you know, when we'd reached the point where we were done with all of the adoption paperwork, you know, we'd already said we're not doing IVF anymore. And then we were just in this space of waiting. Like, it made me crazy as such a like go getter, like make a list, get it done kind of person. And I said to myself one day, you know, what can I do at this point besides wait? And the word that came up for me was intention. You know, I want to live an intentional life because I think that will make me a better parent and serve as like a good basis for whatever child ends up coming into our lives at whatever time. And so I wrote that word like on a sticky note and I put it on my desk. And, you know, of course, like 2 weeks later, we got the call about Bennett. So that's just like one of my big personal values.
No, I love how you said that, you know, the day before your world turns, like you really have no idea, right?
No idea.
Well, the other thing you talked about, self-care as well. And I know inside of, right, as you're navigating, and for you as a daughter, me as a daughter to some really strong women, what we observed from our mothers, it sounds like very similar existence was, despite the pain they may have been going through, whether it was with their illness or just in life as they were navigating this country as a Black woman, right?
Yep.
Is everything was fine. Everything was hunky-dory, right? They never let anybody see them sweat. And so those were the messages that I learned and saw and admired, right? That strength. But we
Totally.
know that, with Dr. Reza Dominican, like racialized trauma is a real thing, right? That both can be true. You can be resilient, but you also can be debilitated by this decision to be strong in light of everything that's going on. So how do you find self-care just in general and make sure to prioritize that when you are trying to be ambitious and to accomplish a lot of goals in your professional and personal life?
So a couple things on self-care. I think in this country, self-care has been totally taken over, just like so many other things, by white supremacy and capitalism. When we hear self-care, we have images of like yoga studios and nail salons and things like that. And to be clear, I love both of those things. I have my nails done right now. I did yoga earlier this week. I'm not down on any of those things. But I think real self-care is about being honest and intentional about what you as an individual need to be okay. And some days it's going to be a massage. Some days it's going to be a nap. Other days, for me, the greatest act of self-care and self-preservation that I've ever taken was one that I didn't want to take. And that was deciding I was no longer going to try to get pregnant. Like, it wasn't working. It was making me crazy. It was having horrible physical and mental health side effects. And it was too physically and mentally debilitating. And I felt like it had taken my life over in a way that I could barely recognize myself. And I knew it wasn't the best thing for me. And it was a really hard decision to make. It was a decision made on the floor of an OBGYN's office, like in tears, but that was an act of self-care. And so I always want to encourage people to just be really honest about what is going on for you in life and like what is going to make it a little bit easier. One of the things I've started doing, an acupuncturist I've seen suggested this evening routine where, when I get into bed, I start out by identifying my feelings. Like, what am I feeling? Like, what's going on right now? And then I think through, okay, like, what am I worried about? Like, what's on my mind? Just to kind of get it out so it's not swirling as I'm trying to go to sleep. And then I end with, like, what are 3 things that I'm grateful for? And like, that's how I aim to end the day, because if you can get at what you're feeling, you may then be able to identify something that you could do differently tomorrow if you're still struggling with XYZ thing. And then when you identify the things that you're worried about, you also may find ways that you could like get help for yourself, who might be able to help solve that problem, kind of thing. And so I think it's just really important to be honest about your needs and do what you need to do to take care of them, because we are not truly well equipped to care for others when we're not able to care for ourselves.
That's so good. Such great advice.
It's hard though. I don't always take my own advice, like, just to be clear.
Like, right, 1 out of 10 times is better than sometimes we've done it previously, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, one more question before we go to the back 9 and let Bennett take over your evening today. But, again, it strikes me that you've been on this incredible journey. You're doing so many different things, from being in the Obama White House with My Brother's Keepers and so many other great initiatives, to the work that you're doing with Beacon Advisors, to like the foundation or charity that you started in support of breast cancer. I find it, as a Black woman, so often as you're navigating these dominant culture spaces, right, there's these clubs that we're trying to get in until we're not. And so I'm wondering, were there clubs that you were trying to unlock along the way? And are you still trying to do that? Or are there clubs that you've now created that allow you to be Marisa Renee Lee fully?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't do that anymore. Absolutely. Especially early on in my career. Like, I can't even remember, because when I was in banking, I was generally the only woman, the only Black person, and usually the youngest person at the table. And so I would do things like, I never wore my hair like this. Like, it was always straight, for starters. I used to wear glasses to meetings with partners, like glasses that I didn't need, just to like look a little bit older. And yeah, no, I don't do any of that. So now it's like, this is who I am. This is what I think I'm meant to do in the world. And it's up to you whether or not you want to be a part of it. And I don't care
That's
anymore.
awesome. Well, and I love the fact that Matt now knows your hair care regimen and can share that with others, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. He's on it. He's on
what's
it.
one thing for a young Black woman who is navigating the corporate space? What's a piece of advice that you would share with her to get to the point where she finds her own club?
Decide what you need to do to like protect your peace of mind. Because America in general, but particularly corporate America, it wasn't made for us. Like it's not necessarily a very friendly place for a Black woman. And so I think it's really important to figure out what you need to do to feel a sense of peace and also a sense of like emotional and psychological safety.
Figure out what you need to do to find your own peace of mind. And
yeah. Because it's different for all of us. So like, I don't want to be directive for anyone else out there, but, you know, be honest about the fact that the workplace, it can be really harsh.
Yeah.
And take care of yourself.
And be unapologetic, right? Because you can, it's like the airplane analogy, like, right, if you can't take care of yourself, then you certainly can't be there for others. And so prioritize self.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, we're here on Unlocking the Club with Marisa Renee Lee. We have a few more minutes with her before Bennett takes over her evening. And we'll be right back with the back nine. I'm your host, Angela Taylor. We're here on the back nine with Marisa Renee Lee. And Marisa, the first question I have for you is, beside your own home that you've now moved into, what's the place that you feel safest to be yourself?
The beach. I love the beach. I love being close to water.
Right. And I know water is important to your mother as well. So that's fantastic.
Yes, you got it.
Well, what's a situation that you still walk into with trepidation every time?
That's a good question. This is so silly, but since we moved into this new house and it's become more relevant, like I love nature. I love being surrounded by nature, but I am like afraid of wild animals. So like, I can't like go for a walk in the woods by myself. I would like to, I want to be that person, but I am not that person because I'm too much of a baby. Like the leaves will crunch or crinkle or whatever. And I'm convinced that like there's a bear coming for me or a bobcat or something else. So yeah, that's lots of trepidation.
I'm with you on that one. Like I've heard too many stories of friends or their kids walking and running into a moose or something. And I'm like, I'm not
no. Unsubscribe.
Awesome. What is something about yourself that you refuse to hide?
How much I love pink.
Well, I love the backdrop. It does well with you. So it's a good color, good selection, and breast health awareness. So I'm sure the color is special for a lot of different reasons. I'm sure you've discovered this through all the different things that you're doing, but what's your superpower?
I think pulling out the best in others. Like seeing things that other people don't necessarily see in themselves.
It's a beautiful thing, right? And great to have someone like that in your orbit. Because sometimes
I think so.
That's amazing. Well, when you think about the world that we live in and the spaces that you are navigating on a regular basis, what's the story that needs to be told?
I think we need more Black stories told, period. Like not just one in particular, but I am tired of Black stories primarily being rooted in pain and suffering, because I just don't think that is all that we are. I mean, I know that's not all that we are. So just like writ large, I want to see more Black storytellers having their voices elevated.
Yes, I love that. And literally that is the premise behind this show, inspired by my mother, was like, we need to share our stories. They're so powerful and connect not just to other Black women, but to anybody. And so people need to see themselves through the prism of a Black woman's story and our voice.
100%.
No, that's amazing. I love it. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Well, and when you're at your best, however you would define best, like what's true for you?
When I'm at my best, I am well rested and full of joy, and probably trying to start some other project or effort or initiative, which is something I'm working on.
Well, that leads us to, is there a special project that you're working on? And where can our listeners find you?
So Grief is Love is still my primary baby, but I am trying to raise some money to support research at the intersection of grief and racism. because I feel like there's a lot there. And in order for me to be an effective advocate around shifting grief policy and ensuring that healing is accessible to everyone, I want to gain an even better understanding of what sits at that intersection of racism and grief. That's something that I'm doing sort of quietly behind the scenes, but please buy Grief is Love. You can grab it wherever you like to buy your books, and you can find me everywhere as marisareneelee.com. That's my website, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc.
Well, that's fantastic. I cannot wait to hear more about that project. So important. Again, I think quite often and talk quite often about Dr. Resma's work. And I think too often people don't understand about, right, the grief and the experiences that we have navigated with aplomb, right, and still are thriving in some regard, right? But there's a lot to be unlocked there. So kudos to you for the work that you've done. Thank you so much again. I tell everyone about this book. I keep it in my room with me, just in case I just need to read a passage from it, just to remind myself that those moments that feel uncomfortable is because there's love presence, and it's just my mom is in the room. So thank you, Marisa, for everything that you've done. Thanks for joining me on this show today.
Absolutely. Thank you for welcoming Bennett as well.
Absolutely. The future right there. The future is bright. All right. I say this every week. It feels like another amazing episode of Unlocking the Club. So thankful to Marisa Renee Lee for joining us and for writing this incredible book, Grief is Love. If you do not have your copy, go out and purchase it now. Buy several copies and share it with your friends or loved ones, anyone who's going through grief. It is an easy read, and so much about the book will resonate with you and allow you to actually navigate your journey in a different mindset. And I think that that's really important. So appreciate my good friend Beverly Oden for joining us for today's show. I hope you appreciated the messages and the perspective that we shared about navigating grief and loss in your life. And if you want to continue this conversation, join us over on our Facebook page on the Codebreakers Lounge, where we'll continue to talk about grief. I think this is a really important subject that isn't just a once a year thing. This will be a regular conversation that we want to have on Unlocking the Club, because we all at some stage in our lives will be going through that, whether it's of a job or a loved one that we're grieving. So once again, thank you all for joining us on Unlocking the Club. I'm your host, Angela Taylor. Appreciate all of you for your continued support and listenership. Make sure you share Unlocking the Club with your friends and your family. And until next time, be well.
And last but certainly not least, Sister Taylor's baby girl, Angela.
So I will say there were years and days where I was worried about my job because I thought Renee was going to call my mom, fire me, call my mom to take my job, because she certainly knew more about the work that I was doing than I did. And oftentimes in the last few years, when Greg and I would be taking her to and from dialysis, we would be playing sports talk radio in the car. And, typically, you would think your mom would say, can we put some gospel on or something like that? But she's like, turn it up. Jim Rome is on, right? And then she would get home, if Greg was bringing her back home, she'd get home and say, Angie, did you know such and such? And all this, the latest news. So I didn't even need the ESPN sports ticker. That was my mom for sure. But as Gary said, on behalf of our family, I want to thank you all for being here today. Those of you that are here in person, as well as those that are watching virtually. I have no doubt in my mind that my mom is here with us today, smiling with great appreciation for the fact that you that are here with us, whether you knew her for 5 minutes, 5 months, 5 years, or 5 decades, that you're here to celebrate her life with us, and that you touched her life, and probably knowing my mother, more important to her, that you touched the lives of her husband or her kids. And so we're grateful for those of you who've traveled near and far to be with us today, and to be here to celebrate her life, and the life of someone that had a loving impact with everyone that she encountered and in every community that she lived in. Recently, as the sad news was circulated, a friend encouraged me to take note of what was to come. And he said that what was to come was that I was going to get new perspective on the amazing woman that my mother was through all the different stories that her friends and family and acquaintances would be sharing with us throughout these times. And so I'm so grateful for that insight, Chad, and grateful for all the stories that you all have shared, the moments that you've reminisced with me about, the quiet times that we've just been able to sit in each other's company. It has been a welcome support over what is a really difficult time for my family and I. And so as I was trying to figure out what I was going to say today, I thought I'd return the favor to those of you who have these amazing memories of my mother. And as Gary said, and as my mother would let you know, if people thought I was shy and didn't talk a lot, my mom was always in the back room like, wrap it up, Angela. So I know she's looking down saying 2 minutes. Yeah, good luck. Good luck with that. This is gonna go a little bit longer than 2 minutes. But I just would like to share a few moments with you as we celebrate the best person I've known. And share a little bit about how I saw her through my eyes. Recently, Renee was in town just kind of helping me get prepared for this moment that as a daughter, who was her mother's favorite daughter, but as a nurse in the ICU learned I was also her only daughter. She's like, you're really her favorite daughter? Who's her other daughter? And my mom was like, she's my only daughter. But as I was going through some mementos, I have this box that I've carried with me for years that has notes and letters and cards from my mother dating back as far as 1995. And as we're going through the box, Renee was kind of going through the box a little bit, and at the bottom of the box was a letter in an envelope that was addressed to my mom, and it was sealed, and it had never been sent. And so, 1995, I was young, I was probably in New York City doing something, I don't know, and forgot to put it in the mail. But Renee handed it to me, and she's like, open it. And so I opened it, and again, it was one of the first of many gifts from an angel that came. So I just want to read a little bit to you about that card. So here's the card. From your daughter to my loving mother. What the daughter does, the mother did. And the card reads, Mom, you taught me to care about people, to be aware of their feelings and understanding of their problems. Of all the things you taught me, these are probably most important. They're also the qualities I like most about you, and the same ones I hope people will see in me. So on Mother's Day, Mom, I especially want to tell you how much you mean to me, not only as a mother, but as a person I admire and love so very much. And as I read the card, like whoever wrote for Hallmark was spot on with this one for Alice Faye for sure. But again, it was a gift for me to see it in that moment. And it also was just a piece of what she meant to me. So I'd love to share a little bit, kind of in compliment to what Gary shared of what our mother meant to us throughout my life. And I have to say, I came home about 6 years ago. For those of you that knew me when I was that high school junior or senior, I couldn't wait to get out of Dodge. And while you all are checking off your bucket list by being in Mountain Home today, I'm sure in the metropolis that it is, I cannot wait to get out of here. When I was graduating from high school. But I came back about 6 years ago. Never thought I was going to come back. And I came back for my mother. And I'm so glad I did. It's been a blessing. These 6 years have been full of love and memories and laughter and moments that will keep me going.
But also what those last 6 years did was validated how amazing my mother was and how much I admire her for who she was to us, what she taught us, what she stood for. And I just hope I can follow in her footsteps and do some of those things. So here's some of the things that she taught me. She taught me about courage. So she told me that when after she graduated from high school from Galilee, went to Texas Southern, she would go back and forth. My dad was at Wiley College in Marshall, Texas, so I don't know, probably a 4 or 5 hour drive, right? It's before you had your own cars. And so she would hop on Greyhound bus from, East Texas to Houston. And every now and then when she would want to travel back to visit her mom, visit my dad, she'd have to hop on that bus. This was in like 1964, 65. All right, and we all know the world that we are living in right now. Imagine a single black woman in the middle of nowhere in Texas on a bus, traveling through these tiny communities with people that didn't look like her. And when the bus would stop at midnight in a random small community, and you had to get off the bus and wait for the next bus to come, and you had to sit in places where you weren't sure if you were safe or not. But she persevered because she wanted that education. She knew that was going to be the difference in her life. And this is the story she would tell about how afraid she would be, but she knew why she had to get on that bus. That was courage, right? And I know that anything that I have to go through, right, can't compare to that. But that strength and that courage will live on in me and Greg and Gary. She taught me about being an advocate. And for those teachers that are in the room, I'm sure there's probably stories about her advocating for her children that we don't even know about and probably don't even want to hear, because we would be those kids that would want to say, Mom, please don't. But she did. And I know one of the earliest, I didn't find out about this till years later, but I found out that she went and pounded on the table at the Parks and Rec that said, no, if Greg and Gary can play, Angela better be able to play as well. So where's the application form? I'm putting her name down. And I know that has changed my life as well. Being able to participate in sports has changed all of our lives for very different reasons. And Gary probably became the quarterback that he became because he had a sister that had some pretty good hands. Probably your best receiver ever, right? Come on. She taught me about honesty and integrity. And both of my parents taught about that. Right? Military family, right? There's no doubt. But we knew, look, don't mess up. Don't show up at King's. King's used to be a department store here, or the Merc. Right? Don't get off campus during lunch because your mother said you couldn't. And if we were off campus, Mrs. Collier worked right next to the Merc. And I know we would get home, and somehow, some way, my mom knew before I even got home that I had been off campus. It was maybe like just a foot off campus, right? And she's like, oh, did you go off campus today? And if I even thought about saying no, right? I knew there would be some consequences. But no, she taught us about honesty and integrity, like in everything that we do, right? First and foremost, we're gonna do things well, we're gonna work as hard as we can, and we're gonna do it with integrity. She taught us about commitment. And I remember in 8th grade, in 7th grade, I wanted to play basketball, but it didn't start for girls until 8th grade. Mary remembers this. And so I remember going to Mrs. Starkey's class. She was my English teacher, and she also was the 8th grade basketball coach. And after class, again, I was shy at that time, so I didn't really say very many words. And I went up to her, I was like, can I play basketball? I really want to play basketball, and I'm pretty good. She said no, right? And then went on to better business. So I had to sign up for math relays instead. And so Mary and I were rocking math relays. We made math relays cool. But then in 8th grade, I finally got a chance to play, and it was volleyball. It wasn't the sport I wanted to play just yet. It was basketball. It wasn't basketball season, but it was volleyball season. And so after going through about a week of practice, I had never really played volleyball before. All I remember is, like, if you've played volleyball, Bev, I know, Olympic volleyball player, like your arms, like the first couple of weeks when you're learning your arms are just tethered. Like, right, my arms were sore. It was like a Friday, and Gary was going to be starting his first game as quarterback as a sophomore on the high school team. And I remember this. And I was like, got practice, a sport I don't really care too much for. My arms are kind of killing me, and Gary's game is starting in a couple hours. And so I walked home from school, took my bag, walked home, get in the house, walk in the kitchen. And she said, "What you doing home?" I was like, "Oh, Gary's game is coming up." She's like, "Yeah, volleyball practice." I'm like, "I don't think I'm gonna play that anymore. I don't really like it." And she said, "Go get your bag and meet me in the car." And so, as Gary said, I went and got my bag and I met her in the car. And it was silent for the first couple of, Greg knows, right? It was silent for the first moments. And we got to the end of the road and she said, "What do you think you were doing?" I was like, I just, it's not for me. Like, I'll wait for basketball season. She's like, "Look, Angela, you were the one that signed up and said you want to play volleyball. If you make a commitment to something or someone, you follow up on that commitment." And I'm so glad I did. I actually really enjoyed playing volleyball. We had some great times playing volleyball. I learned a lot of different lessons in that, but that has always stuck out in my mom. Like, it was unequivocal. She was not gonna let me not show up to something that we done. And that's shown in a lot of different things. If I make a commitment to something, I may not do it well, but I'm gonna do it with all I have. She also taught us about the simple things matter. Right? It didn't have to be these big things. Sometimes, like, I was living in New York City, so you thought it had to be these grand gestures, right? And recently, a few years ago, we decided to meet Gary in Salt Lake, and we were going to drive down. My mom, dad, and I drove down to Salt Lake to go to a Stanford football game. And so the football game was late Saturday night, and I just started my food tour, and I had an early food tour that I was leading the next day. And so we were literally going to have to go down, watch the game, and get back on the road and drive back. And so we did it. It was a great game. Stanford won. It was freezing, but we had a good time. And then we drove back, and the tour was going to start at about 10 o'clock, and we got back at about 8:30. So I knew, I was like, okay, I just need about half an hour shut eye. So I just laid down next to my mom, and she said, "Angela, thank you. That was the best moment of my life." The simple things. The simple things would be when I would get my big bowl of ice cream, and I'd give her a little bowl. And she'd look at my bowl saying, like, "Okay, who is this? Like, right, this is my child." But she would be happy just with that little scoop of ice cream that I would give her. She also taught me about humor. I can sometimes tend to be pretty serious from time to time, but these last 6 years, I learned to laugh at myself and to be goofy just with her. And in one of those ways that we got to, and Greg became part of this as well, is anytime either I would call her or I would get home, I'd open the door from coming into the house from the garage, and whether she was in the living room or in her room, I would say, "Who this?" Right, "Who that is?" And she would say, depending on what was happening that moment, "This is Mrs. Peanut Butter and Jelly Sandwich," or "This is Mrs. San Antonio Spurs." Whatever was happening in the moment, like, she picked it up pretty quickly, and it just became our little banter back and forth. And honestly, it just made me chuckle. Like, right, I know for those of you that are parents, like, when your kids say something and you don't want to laugh in front of them to know that it was funny, like, that was me. Like, she would say something, and I didn't want to let her know that it was like the most hilarious thing. Or Renee, when she would be talking about, the Stanford women's basketball team and how, like, they need to actually be able to get the ball past half court, like, right, work on their ball handling. I didn't want to let her know that it was the cutest thing to see my mom enjoy some of the things that I was enjoying as well. She taught us about faith. And in many of the notes that Renee and I were going through, that she had, whatever she would write, her messages were hilarious. And for those of you that know me, she started sending me care packages my freshman year in college. She probably continued sending them for about 20 years, but I still was getting them, and Gary and Greg didn't really get the same care packages, so favorite daughter status. But she would find whatever size box, And every square inch of that box would have something in it. Like there was no wasted space. Like, if she had to go to the dollar store and find something, like, right, just to make sure that, Angie had anything she needed. And she would send me my Cheerios and my cereal so that she could make sure I was eating for everything. But inside of every package, there would be a note. And it would be some kind of message, either of support or acknowledgement of how proud she was of what I was doing, or encouraged me to keep moving. And at the bottom of every note, she would say, take care, pray every day. Take care, pray every day. She taught me about purpose. And I think this was reinforced over the last few years, where she got to witness me as a businesswoman trying to build my business. And it was kind of one of the things that I always was tickled with was somehow, some way, she would always perfectly time it. Like when I got off a conference call, I would hear this voice from the living room say, "What's a 7-letter word for such and such?" And she's doing crosswords, and I'm like, how does she always time it for when I'm off of a conference call? It wouldn't be during the conference call, but it'd be like in the moment after a conference call. Then I realized that she actually was using my iPad, and my calendar was popping up. So she would be like, oh, she's got a meeting that ends at 11 o'clock, and so I'm gonna hold on until this crossword puzzle and this answer that I don't have. But what she also did was she got curious about the work that I was doing. And she got interested in the work that I was doing. And she was encouraging me with the work that I was doing. For Indulge Boise Food Tours, she was my chief marketing officer. Like people around the community would have like my little cards, and I'm like, where'd you get that? Oh, your mom handed it out, right? And she amplified to do things on purpose and to do things with a purpose. And I will take that with me and continue to try to do that and continue to try to have an impact, such as the impact that she had. Gary's looking at me, he's doing my mom signal, wrapped up. And she taught me about love and family. I've lived in many places, and each one, like you put a stake in the ground and you feel like it's home. But I have to tell you, and this is as shocking to me as it could be to anybody since I was trying to get out of Dodge. But when I moved back to Idaho a few years ago, when I moved back, this really felt like home. And it felt like home because I was with my parents. And it felt like home because I was able to spend some extraordinary moments and build some amazing memories with my mom. So I had a lot of time, an honor of a lot of time spending with her over the last couple of years. And I know there's a couple things that she would want me to say. First, she would want me to make sure, Dad, that you knew that Mom loved you for your strength and your commitment to family. Greg, Mom would want you to know that she loved you for your kind, gentle, and loving soul. And Gary, Mom loved you first because you kept me out of trouble. But seriously, she loved you for your generosity and compassion for others, and always being there for whoever needed. My mother was the best person I know. I'm gonna miss her every day, every moment. But Mom, we'll take care of each other. And we'll pray every day. Love you.
Thanks for listening to Unlocking the Club. If this conversation resonated with you, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or your favorite streaming platform so that you can experience every episode. And follow us on social media, where you'll hear about future guests, access special features, and connect with this amazing community. Head on over there and let us know how you are unlocking the club. Until next time, peace.